Hello, Dinosaur Adventureland. Brother Dave here, live from La Casa Verde in beautiful Slidell, Louisiana. Yes, I survived Hurricane Nate, the Speedy Gonzales of hurricanes this year. Pretty small and got through here so fast, I barely even noticed. Anyway, I'm glad to see y'all. I miss y'all and hope to get back up there to visit you soon. Now, everybody knows that, well, most people know that I started this high-level document called Options at Dinosaur Adventureland back in July, and at that point it was an incremental approach to permaculture planning and execution. I've since decided to expand that to kind of include everything, so we all have a view of everything that is going on or is planned or that we've talked about doing at Dinosaur Adventureland. Now, I'm sitting here in my dome home. My little dome, I shouldn't call it a little dome home, is 2,800 square feet. A lot of space for one guy. I am looking for a wife still. No? No takers? Okay, moving right along. Where the heck are we? Okay, where are we now? Well, when I got there, I was all about establishing an incremental approach to planning and execution enabled by the following, which was creating the eagle's eye view, which is completed. That's kind of what you're going to be looking at next. I went through a discovery of all on-hand resources, everything from foraging to what kind of materials do we have on site that we could use for stuff. And then I showed how we can use preliminary plans to break larger projects into smaller, usable increments that are a finished product in and of themselves, and that's ongoing. It's called an agile approach to project management. It's very much in line with what Dr. Hovind does. So here's the eagle-eye view. Now, y'all might notice there's a lot more icons on here than there was the last time we looked at this. And we have just one or two things marked as planned but not yet approved. So this is getting really good visibility with Dr. Hovind. Now, that's kind of hard to look at because you can't read anything, so let's kind of zoom in on a few areas here. Zooming in on the North 40, not much has changed there since the last presentation, except we've added a terrarium around the two pear trees, and those are pear trees, Asian pears. In fact, there was some debate about whether they were quinces or pears or whatever. I finally did look it up. They are Asian pears, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. Moving right along. We can zoom in on base camp. Not a lot of change there, except the kitchen garden has been marked as incomplete, and we've got something in the corner there called cuttings. I'm going to go into detail on all of this in upcoming slides. Oh, we did add a VIP deck to the VIP housing. And zooming in on the activity area, we've got pine gill plantings and a pine purge. We added a goat pen. There's greenhouses. There's greenhouse materials have been thrown in there, and there's a petting zoo enclosure with an animal barn and a completed goat house. We'll talk more about that too. All right, zooming in on the east side, oh, what do we have? We've got sugar canes been planted down there since the last presentation, and we have a racetrack area that's been added. Zooming in on the big lake, we moved the giant hadrosaur to a different spot. We marked the zip lines and the Tarzan swing as incomplete. We added erosion control, we added aquatic plants, and we also marked the dock as incomplete. I'm also including a little bit on the adjacent property since we did some exploring over there, and it is worth documenting. Finally, we'll zoom in on the other lakes and look at how they fit into probably the overall plan of what we're going to be doing in the near future. All right, let's go to the North 40 first. That's where I had the most stuff going on. The foraging walking tour is up there. Look at that. It's about the easiest thing to complete at no cost. We can selectively prune the area to create a more park-like appearance that still feels like being in the woods, and in the process ensure that all snake habitat is mitigated, taking out decaying logs and piled organic debris, which we will use on site for hugelkultur projects. Need a little help from Lady Di on this, and currently we need a volunteer to come up to speed on all the edible plants that are represented up there and create a narrative to give a little tour. Now, even if we never actually finish this foraging walking tour, having documented all this stuff up there and going up there and tagged everything was a great thing to do, because there are so many wild edibles up there, from grapes to beautyberries to raspberries to hickories and pecans and sassafras and Adam's needle and elderberry and blueberries, and I'm sure I missed a few in there. Oh, don't forget Yopon holly, which is, you can make coffee out of. Yes, it has caffeine, so you guys will never run out of coffee because there's so much Yopon up there. But we, even if we never complete this, we should keep in mind what's up there and be conscious of that when we're mowing and clearing things out. Let's not just run over things indiscriminately or even burn things down. That's happened in the past. All right, old well. This was all about irrigation, and not much has changed on that. We talked about fixing the old well. There's going to be quite a bit of work and a bit of money to get that done. And the question is, do we really need irrigation up on the North 40 on a permanent basis? And the answer to that is probably no, because we're probably going to be planting fruit trees and fruit tree and nut tree guild plantings up there using hugelkultur and permaculture techniques, where after the first year, you shouldn't need any irrigation any longer. So what do we do instead of the solar powered pump and all that? We can repurpose the portable fuel tank for the same irrigation purpose using the existing water pump that we have, where we fill from the lake and go up there and do our irrigation. We also have about 100 Oyas available from here at La Casa Verde on my micro farm for below ground irrigation. They're easily gravity filled, they're no cost. I have 100 of them. I'm not going to use them because my hugelkultur permaculture is 2 to 3 years old and needs no irrigation at all. I haven't irrigated in 9 months here, guys. Amazing. All right, moving right along. Oak speciation exhibit. This one kind of got put on the back burner for a little while because of manpower, resources. We had a lot of stuff to do, and we got a lot of stuff done. But this is an easy one to complete. By late September, I had planned to go out and tag various oak species to be transplanted after the first frost when the plants are dormant. It's not too late in the year to go out and still identify some small oak trees that we could use for this exhibit. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on the North 40. It's just shown up there now because that's the richest ground. We could put it anywhere as long as we're willing to enrich the soil where we plant it. We plant these trees. You can't plant them in sand. They will not grow. Okay, it's about 3 to 4, maybe 5 man days to complete this. And if someone wants to grab my book, The Lord's Bounty on Forest Foraging, they'll be able to easily identify every oak species on the property. Okay, pecan guild plantings. Anyone who knows me has learned something about guild plantings, and we know we have a giant pecan up on the North 40 as well as a giant hickory. And let's take a look at that. I'll just explain this one. Planting in beneficial guilds can more than double the productivity of all species in the guild with a 3 to 5 year span for maximum productivity. In other words, it takes 3 to 5 years for the plants to fully mature and really kick in, starting to help each other out. By beneficial guilds, I mean planting plants that benefit each other. Things like we plant nitrogen fixing plants around the fruit trees. Fruit trees are nitrogen hogs. So instead of throwing nitrogen fertilizer on the ground, which really disrupts the ecosystem in the ground, we put some nitrogen fixing plants in there that will slowly over time and continuously add nitrogen to the environment. We also add things like comfrey, which is a dynamic accumulator, has a very deep taproot that goes down anywhere from 10 to 30 feet and pulls up micronutrients out of the ground, concentrating it in its leaves, and the leaves drop off and form a mulch all around the other plants that is extremely nutrient rich. So comfrey becomes a fertilizer. Another beneficial thing we do is we plant aromatic herbs, which confuse the heck out of the insects, and the insects can't really find the plants that they usually prey on. In fact, they usually stay away from these aromatic herbs. Now, the cost for the pecan guild planting was around $250 to $300, and you'll notice that I downgraded my guesstimate on pecan meats per year. It was somewhere around 100 to 300. I was very optimistic, but anyway, what we found was there was a big problem with scab on that pecan tree, and scab is a fungus that attacks the nut where it attaches to the stem of the tree, and then the nut never matures and even falls off early without any meat inside the nut. We saw that starting to happen in late July when we had all kinds of nuts falling on the ground. I went up and harvested day after day after day and got gallons and gallons of nuts and opened about 1,000 nuts and found no meats in them. The good news is the nuts that I harvested in mid-September did have pecan meats in them, but we're probably only going to get 25 to 30 pounds from that if we're lucky. Now, we did harvest from the hickory tree up there, and brother, that hickory tree had no problem with the scab, and there was just lots and lots of hickory meats. I think we got about 3 or 4 pounds total, and we're not done harvesting up there if anyone wants to go up and harvest. They are difficult to get out of the nut, although I did show a couple of people how to do that. And that explains why hickory nut meats sell for $35 a pound, but they are incredibly delicious and nutritious. So we might do a partial guild planting around that hickory tree, say probably some comfrey, and perhaps we can get some nitrogen fixers around it as well. And this is the basic plan for a pecan planting guild. You're welcome to look at this in more detail. Pick and choose what you want. We've got some fruits growing around there as well that are very interesting, as well as the aromatic herbs and medicinal herbs. And oh, by the way, comfrey is a medicinal herb as well as being a dynamic accumulator. And you'll find that with planting guilds, you try to pick plants that have multiple purposes within the guild. In other words, multiple benefits. Not just for the plants, of course, but also for you. They provide food, medicine, and cooking herbs as well. Okay, next up was the oak planting guild. There was a white oak, a laurel oak, out in strategically located all by itself up in the North 40. What a great place to do a planting guild around an oak. Now this is would be nice to do. We're probably only going to get about 25 pounds of acorn meats off that laurel oak because they are very small acorns. But it would be an interesting thing to do. I did identify one white oak on the property, an actual white oak that gets acorns that are about 4 times the size of the laurel oak acorns. Pointed that out to Bobby and I pointed that out to Rich. These are worth going in and harvesting. And when I left a week and a half ago, all the acorns were still up on the tree, still very green. So typically these larger acorns fall a little later in the year, probably right around mid-October to the end of October. So it's worth harvesting them. And even if you can't process them, wait until I get there because they need to dry out for 4 or 5 weeks. So harvest them, put them someplace to dry out, and I'll get up there and show you guys how to process them. And this is your basic oak guild planting. You'll see we've got some hazelnuts around there, pawpaws, a lot of comfrey, gooseberries, strawberries, ginger, daylilies, which have edible flowers and roots, and lupine, which produces an edible bean. So it's not just acorns around this thing that we get food from. So it's probably worth planting. Total cost about $270. That cost could drop because I just took the first costs that I found on the internet, and we haven't even considered we might get donations and seeds and plants donated to us. Even that could happen. Paraguild planting in terrarium. We all recall on the last presentation we talked about Dr. Newton's terrarium as a, hey, this is an interesting idea. Let's look at it. Those are, as I said before, Asian pears. Initial cost on these would be probably 100 to 150 per guild, guesstimating 25 to 50 pounds of fruit per year, plus beans, herbs, and medicinal yields from that as well. And we have harvested 15 pounds of pears already this year. And those things are like hard as a rock, these Asian pears. They are not for eating raw, I don't think. I think they're for cooking, but we did leave a bunch of them on the windowsill in the kitchen, hoping that they would get softer. We tried a few raw, very, very tart. But the locals have a lot of these planted from homesteading days. They're all over the place around here. So either they're really good for cooking or they have a very long shelf life up on the shelf, or probably both. So those are worth keeping. Now this tree is a good candidate for Dr. Newton's tree terrarium proposal. Initially he had suggested we need a tree about 100 to 150 feet tall. Well, the logistics of building a tree terrarium around that with the resources and manpower we have is kind of like, not gonna happen probably. But this pear tree is of a good size, about 40 feet tall, where we could think about putting a terrarium up there as a proof of concept project for Dr. Newton's tree terrarium. And that would be a really cool thing to do. Even if we don't build the terrarium, a pear planting guild is a good thing to build up there. It'll increase the number of pears that we get and be very good practice for creating fruit tree guilds. And I apologize, I didn't take the word quince out of this drawing in two places. I forgot. Okay. Blue Petrellus farm is another idea I had for generating money. Done that here on La Casa Verde, and 4 plants got me like 200 sponges last year, and that's anywhere from $500 to $1,000 depending on what price I eventually get for those sponges. But they have an incredibly long shelf life. They're sitting up on my second floor, and they can sit up there for 5 years and still be saleable as long as they stay dry. So I highly recommend somebody think about doing even a demonstration project at La Casa Verde. 4 or 5 plants up on the North 40. The deer will not eat these things. Nothing eats these things because they're incredibly bitter. They're really not all that edible. And even if you cook them for yourself, you have to pick them very small and cook them in the right way. But the yield is about $20,000 to $30,000 per acre planted. And really easy to get started, not a whole lot of cost. So if somebody wants to take that on, even just 4 or 5 plants next year, you generate about $1,000. Worth trying. All right, hanging garden and vegetable farm. I'm really thinking that needs to move from the North 40 down to what I call the South 40, or actually Freddie calls it the South 40, which is below the big lake and beside Stump Lake. Right there in a little depression, there's a whole bunch of grass growing, so that's kind of fertile soil. We would have to add a lot of organic material to that to get a garden going, but not as much as we would have to add in other places because it does have already have stuff growing there. And the reason for moving it too, I should explain, is because having it up on the North 40, your vegetable garden is about half a mile away from where you live, so nobody is going to be up there all the time or want to be up there all the time tending to the garden. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. You don't typically place your vegetable garden far away from where you're living. It should be close to where you're living so you're constantly visiting it. And the animals will tend to stay away from it, the wild animals, if your garden is closer to human habitat. Now, just briefly, I can come up there and coach you guys on how to do what I've done here at La Casa Verde. On 1/20th of an acre, I was able to produce enough food to feed 1.5 people, and that was back in August. I've actually produced 200 pounds, another 200 pounds of winter squash in that time. So we're getting really close to being able to feed 2 people on just 1/20th of an acre, and that winter squash was produced on 1/50th of an acre. That's a lot of food. I'd love to come up there and show you guys how I do it. But if we had 1 acre at Dow, we could easily feed 20 to 30 people. And we have planted hazelnut trees already to start taking care of that vitamin E deficiency problem that I ran into. All right, let's zoom in on base camp. Dogwood speciation exhibit. Same as last time, it's partially complete. We got 2 trees planted. We could get 8 more different dogwood species for like $25 a piece or less. This is right close to the Creation Science Museum, so it'd be easy to walk out there and talk about the speciation as opposed to evolution, microevolution versus macroevolution. None of these dogwood trees turn into pine trees, do they? In addition, dogwood berries can be mashed and steeped in water to create a non-toxic spray that rids dogs of fleas. Hence the name, that's why they call it dogwood. That same spray could conceivably be used over a broad area, base camp, to also rid it of fleas, and that's certainly worth trying. Now, I've got a whole nother slide farther on in the presentation on nothing but an integrated approach to pest management, specifically fleas, because fleas are a huge problem down there. Enough said on that. Okay, base camp projects, pole barn completion. We've got the Creation Museum, future camp, kitchen and bathroom, and the museum entrance, and a lot of stuff to do in there. And I apologize in advance to Anna. Anna, I really don't have much on what you're doing in the Creation Museum, and there should be a lot more. I'd love to come down there and work with you a little bit. You can create your own presentation on everything that you're planning in the Creation Museum and do kind of a show and tell with that if you like. It'd be a great thing to do, very much worth doing, I think. All right, pole barn completion, museum entrance. We need 4 fans hung with lights. Wiring for the 2 fans on the east side of the room needs to be run to the 2 fans on the west side of the room. And then after the fans and lights are up, we hang drywall and paint. Now, we had one contractor come in and quote us a price of $800 to hang the drywall from the ceiling. And that drywall hanging is going to be so high up in the air that having a contractor who really knows what he's doing come in and do it is probably a very good idea. That's a very good price when we consider all the things that can go wrong if we try and do that ourselves, okay? Next is the future camp bathrooms. Outlets and lights need to be hung and wired in both bathrooms. Also, hot and cold water needs to be run to the sinks, showers, toilets. Yeah, yes, I know. We don't need hot water at the toilets, although it might be interesting. Fiberglass insulation needs to be hung after the wiring is all done in the ceiling before the weather gets hot again. I'm sure some of you might recall that room is like a sauna in the middle of the day, and we just simply can't work in there. So getting the insulation up on the ceiling would go a long way towards making it at least comfortable enough to work in until we get some AC installed. So after the plumbing and electricity and drywall, of course, then we can install the toilets and showers and sinks, of course. Future camp kitchen, we need to draw up a plan for what the kitchen layout will be. I stalled on doing that because I looked at it and said, well, where do you want the sink? Where do you want the refrigerator? Where do you want the microwave? Where do you want this and that? I mean, I'm not going to decide for the future cook where everything should be. I think the future cook or someone who knows about cooking, being a cook here, should come up with that plan. We talked to Lady Di and Manon about that. Ladies, it's not too late to come up with just a little back of the napkin drawing so that whoever goes in there to do the wiring will know at least where to start and where to hang the outlets and lights at. We actually had another guy show up who was going to do that wiring, and his first question was, well, I can't do this without a drawing of where everything is, and so he never got it done. Anyway, enough said. Creation Museum, like I said, Anna, so much going on in there. I could do slides and slides and slides and slides on that. Probably we should do a completely separate presentation and maybe do your tour as a video that we could put on the internet. Wow, we could reach thousands of people that way. That'd be great. But off the top of my head, the Fresnel lens exhibit and demo is probably the next project that needs to be done. And we'll set that up for viewing, magnification, and for focusing light to melt things. Kids love to melt things like plastic. We can melt an aluminum can. And then maybe we can melt some sand to make some liquid glass. And then we can throw a cat in there. You know, we got a lot of spare cats. Throw a cat in there and, you know, kind of singe it a little bit. Or maybe somebody's little brother. That'll work too. Whatever's available. All right. Kitchen, garden, and cuttings. Okay. First of all, let's look at the, I think the kitchen garden is next. Kitchen garden needs to be moved from its current location to the area beside the fence on the east side of the kitchen. We're not doing anything with that spot. It's a little shaded, so it'd be a perfect spot to plant asparagus and shade-tolerant perennial herbs. And even where that little kitchen garden is right now, they tried to grow cabbage, tomatoes, peppers, and were not too successful there because it didn't get enough sunlight. Everything was kind of anemic, but all the herbs did very well. So we need to get that thing moved to make space for RVs, of course. Now there's also a pot located right beside the current location of the kitchen garden. That's got an American olive tree in it that's doing really, really well. It produces small olives for pickling. So we need to decide where we want to plant this permanently and go ahead and permanently transplant it. Probably at the end of October is a very good time to do that. There's also a pot here with ginger in it. And a good spot to plant that would be in the rich soil beside Stump Lake, about 1 foot above the water line on a south-facing embankment. Now, close proximity to water and a south face should enable this plant to survive the winter because it will be a warmer microclimate in that little spot. It'll probably never freeze and certainly never freeze the roots. That's critical. Now, if that works and the plant propagates, then we might spread that by transplanting it to some of the southern embankments on the Big Lake. And having fresh ginger, wow, what a boon that would be. And it does get some pretty flowers on it as well. Now, there are some trays and pots. The cuttings are the next thing. Trays and pots up by the kitchen. There are 3 types of cuttings in the pots and trays. And they should be watered at least once every 3 days until they sprout leaves again, and then monitored. If the soil is not moist, water them. They should all be transplanted in the spring in enriched soil using a hugelkultur technique. We've got muscadine grapes to be planted along the fence row of the petting zoo enclosure closest to the base camp to hide the fence there. We've got moringa. Moringa is an amazing superfood. I planted a little moringa stalk about 2 feet tall in the spring this year at my house here at La Casa Verde. It's now 20 feet tall, and all those cuttings you guys have came from that one moringa. This needs to be planted along any south-facing embankment or wall that gets full sun, and this stuff is critical for ensuring a balanced diet. It is a superfood, absolutely. And it has the same protein content as chicken, believe it or not. So it's a good protein substitute, gives you all kinds of vitamins and minerals too. We've also got cray myrtle there, 3 colors, magenta, deep red, and lavender. Now these are nitrogen fixers, in other words, self-fertilizing and sand-loving. So they should be able to survive, if not thrive, on the Big Lake Island and Peninsula where we need to plant stuff to retain the soil for erosion control. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. Those should be transplanted in the early spring. That's it for this slide. Projects at Base Camp. I told you I was going to talk about integrated pest management for fleas. Now, I'm not going to go through this in great detail. We are doing some of it already with the mothballs, the diatomaceous earth, giving the dogs baths, and we could plant some plants that repel fleas. And we can also harvest the citrus trifoliate oranges from the neighbor's property if we get permission to do that, and use that citrus juice and oil mix as a broad-based spray around the camp to kill fleas everywhere. Now, this is really important to do, this integrated pest management for fleas. We need to start it in early April next year, but I can't tell you how many complaints I got from people who came, especially in July and August, about the fleas. You're constantly getting bit by fleas. The fleas get in the bunkhouses. You're trying to go to sleep at night. You're getting flea bit, and that's not a good thing. People may not return after having experienced that, and God forbid word of mouth should get out that Dinosaur in Adventureland is flea infested, which it's not, but we just have a problem there in July and August. But if we get on this early in the year, after the freeze and frost have knocked the flea population down, we get on this early in the year, we should be able to keep that flea population very, very low to the point where you get no flea bites, or maybe just 1 or 2 every now and then. Now, I should note that this last leg of the flea control, the citrus juice oil, may be too labor intensive for us to take on. I did build a orange juice press for those trifoliate oranges and was able to squeeze out about a quart of juice and oil with about 45 minutes to an hour of effort. Now, that sounds okay, but it also has to be filtered. It has to be rendered down. In other words, have to not boil off, but evaporate off a lot of the water and then frozen. So we're talking that 1 quart will probably yield about 4 man-hours of work. And that 1 quart will probably cover only about 1,000 square feet when we use it to spray. So getting enough of that could be too labor intensive. We could buy D-limonene and linalool, which is listed here at the bottom of the slide, from pet stores. And these are non-toxic sprays for fleas that can be sprayed over a broad-based area to kill the fleas, and it won't hurt your dogs, your cats, your kids, or the plants. Okay, I encourage you to look over this slide and implement it. Okay, projects in the activity area. Now, I've just arbitrarily designated this the activity area, but we've got a lot of activities going on there. That's why. There's some pine tree plantings, guild plantings up there. Let's take a look at that. These are pretty cheap to implement, $85 to $100. That cost could go up. I was looking at hazelnut trees for some reason, and the cost is just about doubled on those, and the same thing for chestnut trees as well. But those two trees are very critical for providing us with vitamin E and oils in our diet that we really, really need. Let me stop right here and say one thing. All these plantings that we're doing, the food production and all that, people are going to say, oh, you guys are prepping. No, we're not prepping out here. We're trying to become self-sufficient. Realize, people, that every time we have to go to Walmart, that's almost a 50-mile round trip. So at 50 cents a mile, it costs us $25 every time we go to Walmart just to buy fresh produce. Wouldn't it be nice if we could harvest that right on the property? We would save a lot of time and a lot of money. So this type of thing is really worth doing, and it greens up the property as well. It's organic, it's healthy, it's self-sustaining. That's what we're looking for. Self-sustainability at Dinosaur Adventureland. We're not about prepping. We don't do that. Okay, enough said. Now we should get about 300 pounds of hazelnuts and chestnuts if we plant an additional 3 or 4 pine guild plantings down there. And a pine guild planting, what the pine tree does is it makes the soil around it slightly acidic, and a lot of plants love slightly acidic soil. And you'll see that in a little bit here. Anyway, a pine tree purge, I need to talk about that as well. There is an area marked pine tree purge, and by purge I don't mean take out all the pine trees, but we need to take out enough of the pine trees in that area so that we have kind of lone standing pine trees that we can plant guilds around, where we get plenty of sun, or the right amount of sun, to the plants that we're planting around that pine tree. And this is a pine tree guild planting chestnuts on the south side, where the chestnuts get plenty of sun. Blueberries on the north side, which don't need as much sun. We've got red clover in there as our nitrogen fixer. A lot of purple foxglove is our dynamic accumulator. It gets really pretty flowers on it. We've got some very interesting mints in there as our aromatic herbs to repel insects. Next. Hazelnuts. We've already got the 3 hazelnuts planted and 1 rosemary bush down there. Y'all can go down there and look at it. And you might want to look at that to get an idea of the scope of work involved with the hugelkultur planting around these pine trees. We can't just go in there and start planting fruit and nut trees and all kinds of stuff directly in the sand. It just won't grow. I mean, look around that area. Nothing really grows there except the pine trees. And why? Pine trees are a pioneer species. They can tolerate that sort of soil. But a lot of the stuff we're going to be planting is going to need a little extra help. So we'll need to do the hugelkultur to enable a lot of that. I strongly recommend you go down there and take a look at what I've done already to get an idea of the scope of work. Now, looking at the bottom of this particular diagram and the one above it, there's a partial list of all the plants, herbs, medicinal herbs, fruits, and nuts that love acidic soil. So we could do quite a few of these pine guild plantings with a lot of different variations in them to get a lot of different medicinal herbs and things like that, cooking herbs as well as fruits. And we've got just an unbelievable number of pine trees on the property that we could take advantage of on that. Anyway, moving right along. Greenhouses. Wow, we had a bunch of windows dropped off that we could use to build greenhouses. Now, when I first got here, the push was for let's build this huge greenhouse. It's only going to cost us $35,000 and yada yada. That's a lot of money, and where the manpower is coming to build that, and do we really need a big greenhouse to start? What's the question? And the answer to that is probably no. And having a huge greenhouse to start with is kind of what we call the waterfall approach in project management, where we want everything all at once at a time, and you end up making a lot of mistakes along the way to get that kind of grandiose vision implemented, and mistakes are very costly. So we're going to break this out into a more incremental approach. Having 4 small greenhouses planned to be located at the base of the big sand dune, south facing and dug into the ground to a level of 3 feet to take advantage of passive geothermal heating and cooling. These will be used primarily for dwarf tropical fruit trees, 1 or 2 per greenhouse of a different type in each one, with smaller guild-type plantings around each tree with a varying theme in each greenhouse. Now, I will do the research on tropical guild plantings to find out what we should be planting with what, but we do need to immediately know the sizes of the windows that we have in the greenhouse materials area so that we can do preliminary designs and material cost estimates. Yes, we're going to need to buy some wood to build these things. We also need to know for sure what we can build with the materials on hand. I went down there and took a guesstimate. I think it's around 1,800 feet of glass windows that we have, 1,800 square feet. And I think we can build about 3 greenhouses with that, maybe 2.5. So yeah, we probably need another load of windows to get the 4 greenhouses. But do we need 3 or 4 more loads of windows? Probably not. And remember, that's a 16-hour round trip just driving to get those windows. And you know, if we end up with a bunch of windows that we really don't need, they're all going to go to the scrap metal dealer, and we don't get a whole lot of money for that for our time. There are also some odd-sized windows in there that can't easily be worked into even a small greenhouse because you want the same size windows going up, 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 or across, whatever. We could use those smaller windows to build cold frames for sprouting annual seedlings like squash, tomatoes, peppers, any kind of annual you want to sprout and put in your annual garden can be sprouted in a cold frame. You don't need a greenhouse for that. Keep it easy to build a cold frame. I can come up there and show you guys how to do that. All right. Projects at the activity area petting zoo. Yeah, we're having a petting zoo. We've got 2 goats. 2 cute little goats. Abraham and Sarah. Beautiful little goats we've gotten. We've got this petting zoo planned. You see we added a goat pen up there. We added a goat house that is complete. That's the old watershed. Now, first thing we need to do is fence in this area. Initial cost estimate is about $1,000 for materials. We need to get those 2 goats out of the pen that's beside the chicken coop and into this bigger enclosure so that every morning we're not getting up and literally picking up the goats and putting them into something that we can carry them in, or carrying them all the way up to wherever they're foraging at, because brother, these goats are going to weigh about 150, 200 pounds eventually. You ain't going to be able to pick them up, and good luck trying to drag them anywhere. Although Rich is very good at walking goats, we don't want to be walking the goats every morning. So let's get this thing fenced in. We can use the old watershed as a goat house. That'll be big enough for these 2 goats, even when they're mature. All we got to do is cut a door into it, and we move that watershed up to that area, mark it as complete, even though it still needs a door. Now, when the fence is up, like I said, we can move both the goats and the chickens to this area, assuming that the chicken coop can be moved. We got 2 strong young men there, and we'll probably have more show up from time to time. We get a whole bunch, that'll be a good time to move that chicken coop. Now, we have water and electricity run to the cabin that is adjacent to the proposed pasture enclosure. So whoever is ultimately responsible for the greenhouse plant care and animal husbandry should consider living in this cabin. That's a suggestion, not direction, but it would be a good place for that person to live. We do need to come up with a preliminary design and cost estimates for the animal barn. I will take on the task of researching costs to use a prefab building, see if we can find a used one. We'll eventually need to harvest milk from the goats, and in addition to the 2 Spanish goats we got, we should get 2 pink Nubian milking goats, and that should give us about 1 to 2 gallons of milk per day when they're milking, and that's a lot of milk. We will need to buy 1 blue Nubian milking goat for breeding, not recommended for milking. Okay, not funny. Moving on. Cave crawler, leap of faith, slingshot, potato cannon, Goliath, activity area for kids. This is the fun stuff, guys. Cave crawler, we need to do a preliminary design work on that material so that we can do material and cost estimates. Doc Owen, if you could just give Rich and Bobby some kind of a drawing of how this thing is going to go together with some sizes, I'm sure that they could get this thing built relatively quickly. Goliath target practice is another great one to do for slingshots, potato cannons, trifoliate orange cannons, or anything that can launch as a projectile. Rockets? Rich. Rockets? Rich. Think about it. That would be very cool. All right, but we do need to do the preliminary design work and material cost estimates. Bearing in mind that we would love to have a Goliath that's artistically correct and looks like Goliath. We need someone with the talent to do that, but we could just put something out there that's big and tall like Goliath with targets on it, and people would love to shoot at that as well. Leap of faith next. We need to reset those poles for this and generate some type of preliminary design in writing, a drawing for how the ropes are going to hang so that everybody can look and see how this will be done, and maybe we can do it without, Doc Owen taking a lot of time with that. Doc did talk with Dr. Newton about resetting the poles and making them more secure. Doc, you know all about that. I don't need to go into it. Projects east of base camp. We've got a racetrack over there. Where did that come from? Well, that came from the previous owner. They used to have redneck lawnmower races back there. Actually, this racetrack would be very easy to complete with a little bit of grading work with the tractor. And wouldn't it be a great community outreach if we had an annual or even semi-annual lawnmower race? And we could also race those 3-wheel bicycles, when kids come in, say, hey, you guys want to go race the 3-wheel bicycles and see who can get the record? Doc, kids love doing that. You proved that at your last Dinosaur Adventureland. We also have a lot of unused picnic tables in the playground area, and these could be set up in the pine trees just above the racetrack as a spectator area. Food production east of base camp. 3 things we could plant out there. Sugar cane, we already planted 1 cane that has a dozen nodules. That should give us a dozen plants by next year, which we harvest, turn around and replant in the same way that we planted the original one. That should give us a 100+ plant harvest the next year, and that's enough to harvest and get some sugarcane juice from. We will need to figure out how to make a sugarcane press. Not too hard to do. I've seen it done on videos. And from that sugarcane juice, we can make blackstrap molasses. All you got to do is boil it down to get the water off, and you end up with blackstrap molasses. Awesome sweetener and incredibly healthy. It's not like sugar. It's what God meant us to. The other thing we can plant down there is taro, which is a perennial. And I got to warn you guys, planting anything down there is going to be difficult because there's it's chock full of weeds and stuff that we don't want. And you cannot till it. It's a bog. You take a rototiller in there, it's just going to bog down in the mud, and you might break your rototiller. What I did was I went in with a spade and a shovel, and I literally skimmed out an area where I could plant that sugar cane. We need to do the same thing for taro, but we don't need to do a whole bunch of it all at once. We can do about 10 square feet and plant some taro this week, and then plant some more in a month, and then plant some more in a month. The nice thing about taro is it's a perennial. You just put that tuber in the ground, it's going to come up, and unlike potatoes, it's not going to die in the middle of August. In fact, in the middle of August, it's going to be huge and green and loving it. There's a lot of water in that soil. We'll never have to water down there. Enough said about taro. Plant that on the high side of that depression over there, because we also are going to plant rice eventually, and no grain gives you more calories per acre than rice. Should be really easy to grow, but we'll have to flood that basin to kill off the weeds that we don't want. Probably need to flood it for about a month. And also, I already talked about tilling and not being an option down there. We will need to build a drainage at the drainage end of that basin that is higher than the current drainage pipe, and then give ourselves the ability to block that lower drainage pipe and unblock it easily so we can flood it once per year. The first year we'll have to flood it for a month. The next year we'll only have to flood it for 2 weeks. We'll take the permaculture approach on that. Makes things very easy. Again, I'll show you how to do that. Projects on the Big Lake. Zip lines. Now, last time we had the zip lines marked as complete, but our zip lines were great fun until they get tangled up, and then you need to go out in a boat to get them untangled, and telling people not to release until they hit the water just doesn't work because nobody listens. Typical. Anyway, the problem is in our design where the rope we hang on to will almost always rebound upon release and swing up and over the cable with a lot of force, wrapping around 3 or 4 times with the retrieval line attached to it, and that's also wrapping around the cable, and then it's impossible to retrieve it and pull it back so that you can untangle it. So you have to get down there in a boat and reach up with stuff and try and untangle it, and somebody actually fell out of the canoe doing that once, and not a good thing. But it is some research on the internet, what other people have done, and the internet shows us 2 possible solutions. The simplest is shown on the left here, where a solid triangular holding bar is attached to the rope. Now this will rebound just like the rope that we have, but it will hit the cable on the long side of the triangle and stop instead of flying up and over the cable. Now this is actually shown happening in the photo on the left. And while this design might occasionally wrap around the cable, it shouldn't happen nearly as often. And even then, it'll wrap around much less. So you should still be able to pull that retrieval line, getting it up to the pole and untangling it from there. It'd be much, much easier. You won't need someone to go out in a boat and do all that. So this is probably the solution we should try first. The second solution on the right uses 2 cable lines where you're hanging on a crossbar that attaches to both cables. And upon release, there's no way possible for the crossbar to wrap around either line. Now, while it might be the best solution for future zip lines, it would be a major rework on the design of our current zip lines. So we need to keep this other solution in mind for more zip lines. And brother, who doesn't love zip lines? We'll build more zip lines. Okay, maybe from the north side. Moving right along. Tarzan swing. Another one that was marked complete last time I gave this presentation. The problem is shown graphically below. The problem with the Tarzan swing, it throws you into the water. At least that's the description we got at first, and I really didn't understand that until I went down and looked at it. And I think this graphic illustration illustrates what the problem is pretty clearly. As we look at the launching deck there on your left, we see distance A being the distance from the launching deck to the pole. Now, distance A is more than the distance from the top of the pole to pick any point in the water. If distance A is more than the distance from the top of the pole to any point in the water, you're going to hit the water as you're swinging down, and you won't get that swing through effect. Looking at distance C, where you swing through and release with the rope throwing you high into the air, distance C, of course, is less than distance B. So how do we accomplish getting distance C there without, well, it may be major rework, but we could try moving the top of the pole a little closer to the launch deck, or moving the launch deck by extending it a little closer to the top of the pole, or both of these, and we only need about 3 to 6 feet less on distance A to achieve that big yippee that you see with the guy on the other end. He just like goes, yippee, great, okay. But this will not be a quick and easy fix. Or maybe it will be. Projects on the Big Lake, redneck rope swing. Who doesn't want a redneck rope swing? They're a lot of fun. This is yet to be built, but should be pretty easy conceptually in my mind to build, as long as we don't repeat the same mistake we made with the Tarzan swing. Water up the nose. Everybody hates getting water up the nose, or being dragged across the ground before you hit the water. You don't want to do that. So if we don't repeat the same mistake as the Tarzan swing, we'll get the big yippee out of that. The only problem might be if a rope can throw you across the lake to dry land or to shallow water. That would be a big ouchie. So let's do some calculations first and then build, and then get a few beta testers who will actually try to hit the other side. And by the way, low IQ or gullibility might be a plus for our beta test candidates. Redneck water slides at the big lake. We love our redneck water slides. We actually built one, a little junior water slide down there in green, you'll see. Now, this is another yet to be built attraction. However, we did easily prove the concept when we built the junior redneck water slide shown in green in the photo. We used an existing erosion channel to build junior, and that made it much easier. In fact, one man built that in less than one day. Started in the late morning, and then by the late afternoon, the kids were sliding down the thing and having a ball for a couple hours. The problem we ran into with junior was getting the water all the way to the top of the slide with our little gas-powered pump. And the pump is very loud, and it's exposed to the weather, and it's not very portable. Let's face it, pumps suck. Very well for that matter, but maybe not well enough to supply water to 3 or 4 water slides. We might need to buy 4 expensive heavy-duty pumps to do that. Now, we've talked about an alternative solution. That's using the big water tank that's sitting up on the North 40, and if firmly mounted on the top of the hill, a little elevated, then there should be enough pressure from gravity alone to drive 1 or 2 spray hoses at the top of a water slide. We just need 1 heavy-duty pump to fill the tank up, either constantly or continually. I don't know, we figure that out. But our first step should be to build the tank platform, get the tank mounted, and then get the water feeds up there where we want to build the first slide and fill the tank up. Then we build the first slide using an existing erosion channel that's conveniently located. And then we see how long we can run the slide before the water tank empties or the pressure drops too low. We should do this on the hill by the zip lines. That seems the best place to locate it. And now, after we run it, if we find that the slide runs continually, 6 to 8 hours without emptying the tank or losing pressure, then maybe we should add another slide in a slightly different location, and then run both slides again to see if we run into a water limitation. And if not, wash, rinse, repeat, adding a 3rd slide. Or 4th, we did look at this area and there's enough room for 3 or 4 long slides. And finally, if people really love the slides and flock to Dinosaur or Adventureland, overwhelming the 3 or 4 slides we have, we can build more on the north side of the lake, or build more zip lines over there, or another Tarzan swing. The possibilities are endless, guys. Giant hadrosaur, rock climb, water slide, and gift shop. You'll notice that the location of that has moved slightly from the last time we looked at it after talking to Doc Hoban. Now, this one might seem like a pipe dream at a cost of $1.2 million, and yes, those are real millions, unlike the ones you read about in evolution textbooks. But we never know when God will send us a very wealthy benefactor. It might happen today. And this attraction alone would bring in hundreds of thousands of people every year. You know, there's a giant dino somewhere in Canada that brings in over 300,000 tourists every year. Wow. But probably the best placement for this big dino is in the area shown, with the tail and embedded water slide running into the lake, the body on dry land to easily access the belly where the gift shop is, with the head raised up as high as we can reasonably get it. And then we would have the rock climbs inside the legs and up the necks. Now think a little further, happy thought. Imagine if the water slide ran from the top of the head to the tip of the tail. Boy, that'd be a really big yippee. I'd even ride that myself. Doc, not you, Doc Hoban. I'm talking about the dock here on the lake. The last time we had that march is complete. And well, that was a little optimistic. Anyway, there's no decking on the dock. All we have is the pylons and the framing. We need just $2,000 in lumber to complete that. And you know, I could, even with my carpentry skills, guys, I could do that. But you know, arthritis gets in the way. I'd be whining for 2 weeks afterwards. So, but you know, Rich and Bobby, this is something you guys could easily complete in probably a week or less. We just need to get the lumber. And there's been a lot of talk about building a honeymoon cottage on the end of that dock. I'm not going to render my opinion on that, but we should at least build a shaded pavilion so people can go out there and fish and lounge on hot days And we get quite a few hot days between May and October, where it wouldn't be a lot of fun to be out on the deck. Deck on the dock. Anyway, confusing myself. Moving right along. Erosion control. This is a critical issue out here. This is a big problem for the entire Big Lake, but more so for the peninsula and the island. Within a few years, both of these are going to wash right into the lake and we won't have them anymore. The problem is that the soil is almost 100% sand. And there are very few things that are going to grow in sand. There's no nutrients and it dries out quickly. Now we could try to move a lot of organic material out there, but that's costly and time consuming. We have identified two types of trees that are nitrogen fixers, self-fertilizing, and sand loving. And if they survive long enough, a few months, they will suck water directly from the lake. These two types of trees are Cray Myrtle, and as you saw in the cuttings at the base camp, we have 50 cuttings of those by the kitchen. They need to be planted in the early spring. Also, Mimosa is another one with delicious edible flowers on it. We can grow these from cuttings too. We just need to go out and get them. We need about 50. We need to get them sooner rather than later. You don't want to take the cuttings a week or two before you intend to plant out there, and you can't plant them when it gets too hot. So we should get out there and get some cuttings within the next few weeks and get those mimosa cuttings started. We also need some ground cover to keep the sand from drying out so much. We've identified two types of understory plants that are sand loving. These will act as ground cover. Portaluca is one, $5 per thousand seeds. California poppy is another, $10 per thousand seeds. And as you look at the pictures, they look almost identical as far as colors go. But the Portaluca has a much lower profile and sits closer to the ground and would be more ideal for planting on the embankments of the peninsula and the island. The California poppy, more ideal for planting on the top. Now, if this works on the island and peninsula, then we can apply it to the rest of the lake shores. If it doesn't work, then we need to just throw in the towel, throw down a bunch of weeping lovegrass on there. It's the only other really good and easy option, but weeping lovegrass is really not very pretty to look at. Yeah, I guess it creates some habitat, not very much really. Moving right along. Aquatic plants at the Big Lake. This is going to be cool stuff if we can do it. And I think I figured out a way to start cheap and run with it. We could start doing this in the spring, guys. Let's take a look. Aquatic plants. We need to create habitat in the lake for ducks, fish, and frogs, especially small fish and small things are going to feed our game fish. Boy, wouldn't it be nice to have some ducks out there? Then we could have duck season and rabbit season and duck season. And, oh, sorry, channeling my inner Daffy there. But anyway, right now the Big Lake has almost no aquatic plants, and none of them are nice to look at or even edible. And you know me, guys. If I can't eat it, I usually don't care about it. I'm always hungry. Well, anyway. But the reason is, not why I'm hungry, the reason I don't have anything growing out there is because the soil in the lake probably is the same soil that's on the islands, nothing but sand. So it won't easily support plant life. Now the two areas shown in the photo have a lot more clay mixed with the sand, so these might be the best places to start. We might also consider using Stump Lake as a nursery for some of the more expensive aquatic plants like lotus. Soil in this lake, Stump Lake, is much richer and supports a lot of aquatic plant life already, but again, nothing edible, nothing nice to look at. But the plants that we plant up there as a nursery, as they thrive and propagate, then we can try to transplant some of them to the Big Lake. Now this whole project can be broken up into three distinct stages for planting. First, we go for the easy stuff. That's where we have moist ground to the shoreline. It's the easiest to implement. Most of this stuff can be planted from seeds, and it surely helps us with the whole erosion control problem slightly above and to the shoreline. Next step is shoreline to 1 foot deep. This is certainly easier to do than the deep water plants, less expensive as you're going to see. And this group of plants has a lot of edible plants in it. It stabilizes the soil at and below the shoreline and provides the biggest benefit in creating habitat for aquatic life. And finally, we'll do the deeper water plants going up to 6 feet deep. These provide a lot of flowers, They're typically the most expensive to purchase. They do have a lot of edible parts, and it provides deep water habitat for primarily the game fish. Let's look at the first one. Shoreline to perpetually wet ground. We have a lot of options in there, and you see a lot of seeds, some native plants, and some that are a little expensive, but I think you'll see why we want those moving right along. Blue-eyed grass, $3 per 50 seeds, inexpensive to get started, very pretty, and it'll help shore up our embankments. Blue lobelia, again, inexpensive to start, moist soil to 3 inches of water, so this can go a little bit in the water. Cardinal flower, boy, isn't that pretty. Again, inexpensive to start, and it attracts hummingbirds, and I know attracting hummingbirds is one of the things we want to do. Marsh forget-me-nots. These are very pretty, grow in moist soil and up to 2 inches of water. Again, cheap and easy. Butterfly ginger. This is a native plant. You're going to see later on, we have some of this planted up by Stump Lake, where I went out and harvested some native ginger that I found. This has edible tubers and flowers, and really pretty flowers for that matter, and pretty foliage as well. Common cattail is another native plant that could be dug up somewhere. We'd have to find some place where we can dig it up, where we're not on private property or on any kind of a nature reserve, because you can't go into a nature or wildlife reserve with a shovel and just start digging things up. Bicycle trails are a good place to find some of this stuff, where you go and you dig up just a little bit, not a lot, just get enough to get us started. Now, the nice thing about cattails is the entire plant is edible, and it'll grow in moist ground to 6 inches of water, so it goes a little beyond the shoreline. Next up, hibiscus, pink hardy, $9 each. Attracts hummingbirds. We want to attract hummingbirds. We already talked about that. Grows in moist soil at 4 inches of water, gets really pretty flowers and foliage as well. And Acorus variegatus, a little more expensive, but moist ground is 6 inches deep, and it is great for erosion control, creating habitat. Shoreline to 1 foot deep. You got arum arrow, I can't say that. It's called pickerelweed. Variegated sweet flag, longwood canna, lizard's tail, bog lily. Arum has edible tubers, and it's got some nice looking foliage on it. It'll occasionally get some white flowers, not shown in this picture. Pickerelweed gets these beautiful purple flowers on it, and you can eat the flowers as well as the leaves in salads or cooked. Variegated sweet flag, a little more expensive, but it has edible flowers, tubers, and stalk hearts. Pink longwood canna, very pretty plant to have, has edible tubers. Lizard's tail, $8 a piece, doesn't give us anything to eat, but provides lots of habitat niches for all kinds of stuff. Minnows, tadpoles, frogs, turtles, you name it. Great stuff. And it has these interesting lizard tail flowers on it. Bog lily, just plain pretty. We want to have a few of these if we can get them. A little pricey. We get them last, I guess. Next, aquatic plants, deep water, 2 to 6 feet deep. Lilies are the first category, typically $20 per package of tubers, and they actually give you a kit to get them started growing. And shown on the left here are some of the ones we could buy, and the colors there are just beautiful. You can't see in the video both of the native species, but the one below is white in color, and the one above yellow. They're not quite as pretty as these other ones, but they are native species. So if we're out on a bicycle trail somewhere, or maybe even in the middle of a highway, we could stop and dig a few of these up and transplant them into Stump Lake for free. Finally, lotuses give us edible tubers, flowers, and seeds. You see the two varieties that we could buy on the right at $50 per package. Those are expensive, but we do have some native species, and one of those all the way on the right is kind of pretty, but we have to find those. They may not be easy to find, but we'll keep an eye out for them. Finally, let's look at our neighbors to the west, guys. I did 1 or 2 foraging trips into the pasture beside Doc's house. Didn't ask permission. I just kind of went in there and said, well, I probably do this once or twice just to figure out what's in there. That's what I did, and this is documenting what I found. This land is very rich, and there's a lot of wild edibles. And like I said, we need to obtain permission from the owner before we do any more foraging out here. And that's just simply just go ask them, hey, can we go harvest the grapes or harvest the blackberries or some of the pecans and stuff? What's the worst he could say? No? I don't think so. Now, of course, the chanterelle mushrooms that grow along Pearl Lane can be harvested freely at any time. We did harvest a bunch of these. There's some in the freezer. We cook some up hot. They are delicious, absolutely. And I understand why they retail for $50 per pound because it tastes delicious. Now, in the past year, there's at least a dozen large pecan trees, hundreds of trifoliate orange trees, and you can make, besides flea spray, you can make a delicious, refreshing beverage from the juice of those trifoliate oranges. There's lots of currant grapevines with currant grapes on them, one mulberry tree, a few pear trees, and a few cherry trees as well. It would be nice if we could acquire this property, and Dr. Newton is looking into that. Maybe he'll get it, and I'm sure he'll let us go forage anytime. Finally, let's look at all the other lakes and how they fit into our near-term and long-term plans. Stump Lake. We should definitely stock this lake with minnows that will flow down to the big lake as a food source for our game fish. You can see we planted some butterfly ginger down there. I can't see it with me, my big fat face in the way. Sorry about that. But we should also restock this with game fish. And I know people have told me, hey, we went down there last year and we were throwing food in there and there's fish everywhere, yada, yada. But, you know, I went down there and fished like a dozen times while I was there and caught 2 or 3 fish. And they're not there anymore. What happened? Probably when we flooded Stump Lake, in other words, raised the lake level about 2 feet, we severely disturbed the habitat in there. A lot of those fish migrated down into the big lake. And when we got that big 15 inches of rain and almost overflowed the dam, guess what? A lot of our fish might have gone right out to shoot, and they're no longer in Stump Lake, or the big lake for that matter. So it would behoove us to maybe stock that lake up with some more fish. And we really want people, when they come here, to be able to catch fish, especially if we're going to advertise ourselves as a campsite for fishing. People come here expecting to catch fish, and they don't catch any fish. They're not going to go home, and word of mouth is not going to help us out too much. But if they come here and they catch a lot of fish, they're going to go home and say, yeah, boy, we caught all these fish down at Dinosaur Adventureland. You got to go there. And we'll get more people coming in, and that's what we want. North Lake. This lake needs to be stocked with more fish too, and it's also a great location for rental cabins built into the side of the hill or even overhanging the lake a little bit from the road. There's a steep embankment there where we could build out and have little decks going out where they could fish right from their deck or just sit out there and relax. This is also a good place to use as a nursery for aquatic plants. There's a lot of native plants growing in the water now, so I suspect the soil is much richer there than it is in the big lake. Now, I'm recommending we stock this with some catfish, and everyone says, no, catfish in there, the lake will overflow and the catfish will get into all the other lakes. I don't think so. We got 15 inches of rain and that lake did not overflow. So the probability of that happening is pretty slim to none, and it's great habitat for catfish to start with. Catfish and brim would be great, and some minnows in that lake. East Lake. These lakes, I don't know if they need to be stocked, but what the heck, it wouldn't hurt. These are also great locations for primitive camping. I've explored all around up in there. It's just beautiful terrain. There's lots of places where we can build some primitive camps, and because not everybody wants to stay in a cabin. Not everybody wants to stay, some people want to stay in tents, do some primitive camping. We get some Boy Scout troops up there. All we need to do is build some fire pits, dig some latrine ditches, and build some primitive lean-to shelters so that they have some place to congregate if it's raining. They're not having to hang out in their tents. And in those lean-to shelters, we could build some salvaged wild wood furniture. And Rich knows how to do this. Rich, I know you would love to do some benches and chairs and stuff like that using wild wood, and you want to show off this skill, I know that. And this gives you the opportunity to do that, brother. All right, looking out for you, man. Nice Lake. I call this Nice Lake because there's a little unfinished treehouse right beside that lake, and Nye's kayak is down there. And I understand Brother Nye was trying to build a treehouse down there. We could stock this lake with some more fish, and wouldn't a finished treehouse be a very interesting place to go camping for the weekend? Gives us another advertising option for our whole camp thing. You can go camp in the cabins, you can go camp in the treehouse, or you can do primitive camping. So we'll have all kinds of more options there. It'd be great to finish that treehouse, even if it's just primitive with a roof over top, would be great. Now, 2018 and beyond, Garden of Eden Maze and Walking Tour. I've talked about this before. It's nothing new, you guys. Just to update you, I am 50% complete with my permaculture design certification, and I hope to complete that by January. Once I complete that, I can start applying for all kinds of grants, and there's all kinds of things in here that would really support some of the things that we're trying to do out at Dinosaur Adventureland. Those grants would come in my name, so then I would be responsible for how the money is spent, and any legal repercussions, if it's misspent, would be on me. And believe me, I'm going to look at what the requirements are when they give you the money. If all they want is information, data feedback, yeah, we can do that. If they want to own the facilities, yeah, we'll say no, sorry, we don't need that money. But look at the monetary amounts there, guys. There's a lot of stuff that could really help us out there. All right, guys, that's about all I got. I should tell you, I tried to do this video with video first, and it came out 1.7 gig, and then I tried it with audio, just audio. That came out to 62 meg. I couldn't shrink it down far enough to get it in the email, so I decided, well, let's go ahead and do it with the video again so that you can see my bright, smiling face as I'm sitting here yakking at you. And I'm going to upload this to YouTube. And God bless y'all. Love you. Miss you. Till I update again, and you'll see me soon. I'll be back.